We're really excited to have everybody join us. Thank you so much for taking the time today. We have a lot for you. We have a lot of really good content, and we're going to be talking about email success at scale. And by scale here, we mean like global scale as well as scale. And I think what we'll cover that will really stand out to you is around workflows and thinking about transactional and marketing emails together, which I think is going to be special. So let's start with my favorite part, which is always intros. And with that, I'll let Kate introduce herself first.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Kate. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm on the marketing team at Phrase. I've been working in B2B SaaS marketing for a number of years. And in that journey, I set up a ton of both marketing and transactional emails, and really happy to be working for Phrase. Phrase offers the leading localization technology suite. We use automation and machine learning to power high quality, scalable, and fast localization for teams of any size. And we're stoked to be partnering with Dyspatch to talk about localization with email. So yeah, that's me.
Great intro. It's nice to be here with you, Kate. Kate and I met actually through the partnership with Dyspatch and Phrase, which our customers actually demanded to happen. Dyspatch is the email production platform. So we'll integrate with whatever you're using for localizations, whatever you're using to send, whatever your CRM is. We kind of just slot right in the middle for email production to help you build emails that will scale to 120 locales if you need to. But we also serve, we serve companies as big as Canva that are global, but also little startups and SMBs. So we kind of do it all. And my background in email was I was on the product side with companies that sent to like big email lists. So plenty of fish and SoundCloud, millions of people around the world getting emails from them. And so I kind of lived through the problems that we're going to be telling you about, or I lived through the experiences that we'll be describing. So I think the tips from both Kate and I come from like a place of we've been there, we've tried things, and we'll give you a bit of our experiences. So what I've learned in email is that one, email is tricky. Localizations are really tricky, but two, the ROI is huge. And that's why it really makes it worth it to invest and get things right, especially from the start. So with that, we have a ton of insights. Let's get into it. Here's what we'll cover. We're going to go kind of linearly. So if you were going to build a workflow, this is the process you would follow. So we'll start with planning for scale, some best practices, common mistakes, kind of my favorite part, legal compliance, the do's and don'ts. Don't skip that part. That's a good part. And transactional emails. And just a reminder, transactional are the emails that people want to get, like the password reset and shipping notifications and receipts instead of, here's a promotion. So we'll cover that. And without further ado, let's set the stage and talk a little bit about planning for scale. So Kate, I'd love to start by hearing about your recommendations for planning for scale as you go up and to the right, like go global, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So to plan for scale and building your localization workflow, your first thing here is to know your audience. So I'm going to use marketers as an example here and talk about some things you might want to consider as you think about emailing and marketing to marketers, so and localizing for marketers all over the globe. So you might be thinking about, there's many types of marketers. You're thinking about segmenting that list. So various areas of expertise. You're not trying to bucket them into any single audience. You need to address many job titles, personas, and get in front of them with a message that they actually care about. So you're emailing them. That's a theme that we're going to talk about today is like every email is a transaction. It's a brand touch point, and you don't want to waste any of them. So, other things to consider here with marketers that they get the flood of cold outreach from sales folks in both their LinkedIn DMs, their personal inboxes, their professional inboxes. They wear a lot of hats. And then another, theme across, I think, every department and every tech business right now is doing more with less. So how do we kind of maximize every single interaction and use every email to advance that relationship?
Thanks. And then segging from that to thinking about like if you're planning for scale, think about what you'll be doing 1 year from now, 2 years from now, and then 5 years from now. I think it's really tempting to plan for what's our budget today, what's our scale today, what's like going from 1 to 2 locales look like. But then if you actually think about going to 10 now, if you know that that's where you'll be in a couple of years, that'll really help. And one of the things we like to think about or we'd like to share is thinking about unifying transactional marketing emails together. So Kate, do you want to cover a little bit about like the benefits of thinking about those together?
Yeah, definitely. You need to have that streamlined workflow that we're going to talk through in a little bit, but have that unified brand voice, which I think to have your unified brand voice, you need to take 10 steps back and have that unification across your product and marketing teams, which once you have that product and marketing alignment, it feeds into your business strategy and your global marketing strategy. So how do all of those things align to make sure that you're serving a unique brand experience and a unified brand experience with consistency across each of your locales, but also across transactional and marketing emails. And I think one of the biggest actionable items of all that is just having aligned KPIs. What are our objectives here? How do we track this? How do we measure success? And what does that look like for both the product side and the marketing side?
Yeah, absolutely. And then this last point here about multiple teams, even at scale, if you have multiple teams that could be managing different parts of emails, or the journey that customers go through, to the customer, all of your emails are part of the same thing. They're all emails from one brand. And if you have one team doing transactional and one team doing marketing, the experience can feel really disjointed, even if the branding is on, even if the localizations are perfect, if they're not getting the same oversight, it can start to feel a little bit disjointed. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I think it's really valuable to think of them as being one set of communication coming from one team. And sometimes that means that one team should own both of them. Not always. But doing that also helps you work with one tool correctly. So you have one stakeholder. And I think in the end, that brings a lot of benefits. All right. Next, let's talk about best practices. So we have some real specifics here. Let's cover a few. Uh, Kate, what do you recommend for folks that are jumping from 1 to 2 and then going global? Because I think that's actually the hardest is where do you start and what do you do to make sure that you'll be successful later on?
Yeah, definitely. And I touched on this a tiny bit before, but just to dig into it, localization should ideally be built into your business strategy. So it's coming from the top is your CEO, your CFO, your C-suite is all over localization. They're excited to expand into new locales. So having said that, your localization team ideally has a seat at the table with management, product development, and growth teams. So once you've determined that strategy, and you have your idea of which areas you're planning to localize for, you can start to build out a list of requirements that you need from localization tech and from your language service providers or your LSPs. And you can start to figure out, what kind of tech would we need to go ahead and grow. I'm sorry if you already got your tech in place, if you've already know what you're doing, but just something to think about before you acquire anything. You don't want to start with software, you want to start with strategy. So knowing all of that, and then knowing who your stakeholders are and evaluating your solution, how localizations fits into your business strategy. And also, another thing here is what types of content you're going to localize. So in addition to emails, are you doing landing pages, websites, your products, that sort of thing? What types of content you need to be processing in your translation management system?
I think that's really good advice. Another thing that we recommend at Dispatch is look at the tools that you're already using, right? You're probably already using, here we mentioned Braze, HubSpot, Iterable, and Salesforce because they're really common, but ask the folks at Braze, what's a good solution for me? At Braze, they know about Phrase. They know about the other options out there. They know about Dispatch, but they know your business as well. And they can help you put together a plan for what will work. You can chat with the folks at Dispatch saying like, look, we're doing emails at this scale. Next year, we want to move into Latin America. What will help us do that with email at scale? I think us talking about the tools that we use is important, but we're also here to tell you that these tools have expertise and we can recommend solutions that will work for you. But do the research to ask around and say, hey, look, what are teams similar to us that are doing this at scale? What are they doing differently than us that might actually benefit us in the long run? And how do you build a strategy around that? So starting with the right tool from day one so that you don't have to change tools in a year or two is huge. You want to be baked into the tool that you have and make sure that it'll fit you next year and in 5 years as opposed to having a change. And sure, it might require a little bit of work up front to find the right one, but like nobody wants to change ESPs, email service providers. Nobody wants to change CRMs either down the road. It's a massive headache. We've done it. I don't recommend it. And therefore choose what'll work today, but then also scales to down the line. All right, next we have advice to multiple teams looking to scale to multiple locales. What do we advocate for, Kate? What are your favorite recommendations here?
Yeah, just one thing I would echo from that last slide is just the right vendor is going to be happy to recommend what works for you, for your business. And, at Phrase, we're always happy to make recommendations, and, we'd love for you to use Phrase, but we want to build that relationship on trust and what putting the customer first. So, I'm sure that goes across the board. So anyways, talking about key priorities, and you're gonna, look at your process next. So you have your list of requirements. Now we're looking at your process. And I think my biggest point here is just to say that the right translation management tool is not going to replicate your existing process. The right system is actually going to transform your localization workflow, find efficiencies, and save you money and time by having those proper features, whether it's translation memories, term bases, or AI-powered quality assessment. The right tool is going to take you from whatever you're doing in spreadsheets or documents and take it to that next level to find efficiencies in your workflow.
Yeah, another good example of that is like, can Google Translate do translations for you? Yes, it absolutely can. Does it do a good job? Like, it depends on what. But is that the level of quality that you want to be conveying to your customers about your brand? Right. And so, sure, you can cut corners early on and say, hey, we'll just do a couple localizations. We'll see how it goes. And then we'll decide whether to expand even more. We'll see if we have the team and the resources to do it. But if you kind of cut those corners early on, the quality won't be good and you won't get the ROI that you wanted on it. So I really think investing in tools early and not, nothing wrong with you used to do translations. It works. But human error is such a factor there that you end up having to fix issues along the way. You might as well do something early that's going to actually scale. Which brings us to the last point on the slide, and that's testing. I can't recommend testing enough at every stage of everything that you do. Build that into your process, especially as you're building a new process and trying something new out or going into a new locale. Testing at every stage is going to be key. So make sure that you only localize things one time, that the localization is good, that real humans thought about what you're going to be showing to your customers, and test along the way. All right, next let's cover scale for success. And I think the keyword here is definitely success. That's what we have in mind for you. So let's get into it. So some best practices. Assign your localized emails to the right person for review. I think it's tempting to wait till the end and say, I'll have the manager or somebody from another team or design look at this at the end. All that will create is back like workarounds. So you have to come back and review things over and over again. I think having the design be reviewed and then approved by the designers before you get into, the final stages of approval with your, for example, C-suite, if they need to be looking at that, will save you a lot of time, makes all the difference. Use localizations that have been proven at scale, and that's not using Google Translate as well, but using a team that's worked with other brands that have done localizations at scale for email. Email is a very specific, medium. You don't have a lot of space, less real estate, and how you speak culturally to people in email is very important because they can tell if you're saying color with a U or without a U, depending on whether you're writing to Canadians or Americans. Like, those things really do come through, and having really, really good localizations will help make sure that you don't make those little blunders. People see through those, right? And then I think the last point here, experiment with content and design and your workflow. Even if you have something that's worth working, doesn't mean that you can't make it even better. Kate, what do you think about content and design and workflow as far as something to bake into best practices in your process?
Yeah, I think marketers, we can get really excited about content and design. And I think that making sure that we keep that excitement as we go through this repeatable process of looking at emails that we might send weekly or monthly, that monthly newsletter that might be localized across 10 locales, like, that's a lot of emails. That's a lot of content to crank out every single month. So making sure that you keep that excitement with your content and your design, and you build out a workflow that is clear and repeatable, you're going to find success in scaling. I think another point here, just to echo what you said earlier about quality and using vendors that you trust, is just to make sure that you have process in place for QA, and that you have real eyeballs on that throughout your growth.
Absolutely. Okay, next is maybe my favorite part. I don't like issues to come up in email, but they do. And if you know about the gotchas, you can avoid some of the common mistakes. So, looking at common mistakes, um, what are some common things to keep in mind here, Kate? What do you think?
Yeah, I have some just kind of like a really simple flow here of like when you're building your process, you know that first you're going to get that cross-functional team together. Next, you're going to get aligned on KPIs. And then we talked a little bit about this earlier about creating audience-specific content. So if it's marketers, you know you have a whole structure in place of what to consider for that audience, and you're doing your segmented lists in your emails. Next is prioritization based on ROI. So today we're talking about email. What types of emails are you localizing first to make sure that you're getting your biggest ROI? How many people is that email going to? How often is that email sent? All of these things are things to consider when you're prioritizing different assets for localization. And then lastly, here, a piece of advice would just be to utilize automation within your tech to do some heavy lifting. We live in a highly automated world, and automation is only growing. So how can you go ahead and build that into your process, whether it's like single points of truth for your multilingual content? Is it a centralized wiki? Is it integrations with other marketing tech like HubSpot, Salesforce, etc.? And then those open streams of communication. So that's just a structured workflow on that third bullet point there that you might want to consider in order to get to that ultimate end goal of only having to localize each email once.
I'm going to add some email specific pro tips here that we have learned along the way or common pitfalls. And that's like, don't forget alt text and fallbacks, especially. Um, Fallbacks are, if you don't have somebody's first name, you want to make sure that they have a good experience. We've all received emails where it's like, hi, space, random space, comma, because we thought we had your first name, but we didn't. So instead of saying hi there or fixing for an appropriate fallback, we've made a mistake. So I even have a typo on the slide here, fallback space, comma. Make sure that you have that and that you have a fallback in your localization, because you might not have the same list. You might not have the same details about all your recipients in other languages as you do in English, depending on who's signing up. Don't forget about alt text. That's making sure that if you're going to prioritize accessibility, which Kate and I implore you to do, it's just absolutely the right thing to do. And people notice these things. Not everybody is looking at your email with just their eyeballs. Some of them are listening to your emails, and being able to describe what's in the email really creates an experience for the customer that is all encompassing. And as we say, it's the right thing to do. Everybody's experiencing your emails differently. And, some of those screen reader bugs that we've heard about, we were talking about this while prepping for the webinar, like your screen reader needs to be told what language your email's in. Otherwise it will try to read things incorrectly. And that's not the experience you want. You want everything to work perfectly every time for every customer. And at Dyspatch, we make testing for that really easy. We have just like an email guardrails tool that will do a little checklist and tell you forgot the alt text. Even things like this link isn't properly set up. But these are things to think about whatever scale you're at, because you want your customers to get the perfect email every single time. So I can't harp on testing enough. And this is part of testing. This is part of making sure that everybody gets the right email, is thinking about how people are looking, reading, hearing your email, and also forwarding it. So a few things to keep in mind. Next, we have some more key considerations for you here. I think these are the ones you're going to want to prioritize. So starting with, now, don't let your eyes glaze over. I love to talk about the legal stuff because it can seem daunting and clunky, or like you don't need to do it yet. I'll just wait. Or I think it's tempting to say, well, I can't have a lawyer check this because it's expensive. Yeah, it is. It really is expensive to have lawyers review our content. But there are so many tools out there. At Dyspatch, we recently put together just a blog post that anybody can go look at, of course, saying, here are a couple tables. Here's what to do if you want to email people in North America. Here's who you need an opt-in from. Here's who you need, or where you need to have unsubscribes. Here's where you need to have your address. And we did that for the most common countries that our customers send emails in. And keep in mind, so in Canada, for example, you may need to have French and English content. Our tax agency sends us emails that are plain text. It's like in the top's in English, the bottom it's in French. It's not pretty, but it's compliant and it's the right thing to do for folks who, if you don't know what language they need to receive, that's the way to do it. So don't be afraid to make things not have the most innovative design if they're compliant. It's better to be compliant. Also, keep in mind that in the EU, most countries have specific requirements, even within the EU, for unsubscribes. This can all be looked up. They're very transparent about what those rules are. And even within North America, you got to be careful because even the US and Canada, who we think of as very homogenous in terms of legal email rules, there are vastly different rules about unsubscribes and opt-ins as well. So make sure you check your localization requirements. Make sure that if you have a legal footer that you know is compliant, that you don't let anybody change it on the fly so that it becomes uncompliant, because then you're exposing yourself to legal woes that are worse than doing the legal work up front of getting it right. With that, I'll let Kate actually share a really, really compelling case study here about launching in Japan, which for North American companies is like a big jump. Lots of tools will help you do this, but I would love to hear more about this, Kate. I think this is a great one.
Yeah, thanks. We had a current phrase customer launch both their product and their marketing in Japan at the same time. It required for everything to be localized to Japanese, and it was a huge cross-functional effort to make sure that absolutely everything, every single way that a customer could experience their brand was being localized at the same time so that it could launch on the same day. They did decide to use Phrase to do that. And it was a huge effort that really paid off for them, and tons of different considerations with, different writing systems and how long text might be in English versus their translations into Japanese, as well as the design of everything and the brand look and feel. It was a lot to manage, but they pulled it off, and they were able to use Phrase to do that. So it's pretty cool.
This is a good point too about making sure you think about design really early on, because if you're doing right to left instead of left to right, I don't know. I would have trouble conceiving of how to build an email from a design perspective that doesn't have, standard left to right, but standard in the English world, like left to right layouts. And it is possible to make all these things really flexible, really gracefully your designs adapt to any kind of language system. All you have to do is plan for it ahead of time. But it is possible to do all these things. And of course, you can have multiple versions of a similar email if you need to do that as well. And Dispatch would make that pretty easy. I think that's possible as well. But the main thing is to test, right? To make sure that everything looks correct and making sure that you get it right the first time, as you mentioned, because you kind of only have one chance to build trust. I think that's a really good takeaway here.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to transactional emails. I had a thought when we were putting together the content for this talk that Kate had this quote that just really stood with me, or stayed with me, I guess. And that's that we call transactional emails transactional. I mean, there are lots of names for them, but they don't have to be an afterthought. I think often they are because you think, well, okay, my marketing emails, I'm, changing this every week, sometimes multiple times a week. I mean, some brands send me emails like once a day, if you can believe that. Shout out to their marketing team. They can come up with content like that. But transactional emails are really only changing once every rebrand, once a year, maybe. How often do you change your reset password email? Probably not that often, because once it's working, you don't want to change it because you want it to be compliant, because you want it to work. But that's making transactionals an afterthought. What if you thought about them as an actual growth channel, right? I think there's something there that will bring a lot to your customers. So one example I think of is both Kate and I like Patagonia chinchilla fleeces. Let's say you buy one from Patagonia. In the receipt email, of course, you want all the receipt stuff. You want the shipping confirmation. You want the meat of the email saying, thanks for your transaction. We'll talk about saying thanks in a second. But what if you use that opportunity to say, hey, maybe you didn't know that we have this other colorway. If you want to buy this, it's 20% off. It's not a distraction from the receipt part. It's just below. But if you're sending it to Kate and I, chances are we're going to click through and be interested. And suddenly you've brought us back, you know, and you've made us happy, right? Because you've brought our attention, you brought something to our attention that you knew was going to be compelling to us. So I always think of transactionals as there's always more you can do. I also like the example of if you buy a subscription to something, often we're going to buy a 1 month or 3 month subscription to start something new, whether it's, a newspaper or a game, for example. But what if in that subscription confirmation, there's a code for upselling to a 1 year? I bet people will take you up on that. Or they might not take you up on it today, but they might come back in a few weeks and be like, oh yeah, it turns out I do like this game. I like this thing. Maybe I will take them up on their offer to go to an annual subscription. These are little things that really turn up growth. And all you did is send an email. You didn't have to invest in ads. You didn't have to, send them a new marketing email. It's just something that was there and contextual. And I think that's a really good opportunity to keep your customers happy. And all you have to do is just think about transactional the same way you would think about marketing emails. The last bit is definitely thinking about saying thanks to folks for their business. Transactionals, I mean, Kate, I'll let you chat a little bit more about this, but it doesn't need to feel like a receipt, even if it's a receipt,
Yeah, 1000%. I love what you were saying there about kind of like reading between the lines and seeing what folks might need next at that moment. So if it's a getting started email, you're thanking them for their business, you might be wanting to provide content to help them get started, whether that's, your first thought might be just like, oh, here's a video, but maybe it's a video and it's a product tour and it's a blog and it's an offer to get them on the phone with a customer success manager that they may or may not take advantage of. But you're offering different modalities for folks to do the same thing in different ways for whatever works for them without, overwhelming them. So of course it is a dance. But yeah, just like leading with value, because a transactional email doesn't have to like be just another thing that they send to the trash.
All right, now with this, we're going to come to some pro tips to keep in mind and help you get started. I'm going to talk about this first one, and that's think about friction. What's happening with your customer and their journey with you via email? So let's say you send your customers an email. Can they reply? Can they just hit R in Gmail and write you a message, whether it's a complaint or praise, or more commonly than not, asking for help? Not if you use a no reply or a do not reply or one of those like blocked senders. How are folks going to get in touch with you if they have a real problem or if they need help? I see this a lot. And so the answer I get from brands about why they do this is like, well, we just got a flood. We had too many emails. And so I always think about this from the other perspective. And that's, why don't we fix the problem that you're getting a flood of emails? What are people writing to you about, right? Can you categorize those emails and say, well, maybe we can update the help docs. Maybe we can add a tooltip in the product. Maybe we can, fix whatever problem is happening in their customer journey that's forcing them to reply to this email when you're getting flooded. Instead of blocking them from contacting you completely, because then that's the experience they have with your brand, is that they think that they're not important. And I've found in my background that if people can reply to you, even when they have a problem, and you handle the problem and the solution gracefully, they have a better impression of you than before when they didn't even have the problem, if that makes sense. Like having a positive interaction with you and your support team or even your support docs makes them see your brand more positively. So think about all these little no replies, these little points where we say, no, we don't want to hear from you because, go to this form instead. Well, why don't you just let them reply to the email? I think that's a nightmare to reply and write a reply to something and then it bounces. Okay, next is how do you handle expiring emails? So by expiring, it's like this 2FA code to get you logged into your banking expires in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or like forgot your Amazon password. How do you get it? And password reset links that this will only be valid for 24 hours. Okay, so what if the customer comes back and clicks on the link later or tries to input that code later because they got distracted because they were at work or like with their kids, because we're all busy. What do you do then at that point? What are you showing them that's going to make them remember the experience positively instead of, oh yeah, like I gotta go back through this whole password reset flow again? What can you do to make that a little bit more graceful for people? Also, what can you say in the email so that it doesn't feel like a transactional email with like, click this link, go. Maybe that's a good opportunity to say hello, and say thanks because that might be the only touch point that that customer has with your brand all year is the password reset email. So it's a good opportunity to be nice, say hello and remind them that you care about them. With that, I'm going to hand off to Kate to tell us some really good pro tips about what should be in your transactional footer.
Yeah, thanks. I think there are so many legal requirements, of course, of what has to be in your footer, whether it's your address or unsubscribe or manage preferences, and that's all really important to include, of course. However, I do think transactional footers can be a fun opportunity to um, catch the attention of the folks that actually read them. So whether it's a little bit of micro copy or an emoji or some combination of the both, you can really play around with it and see if anybody responds well. Without being distracting from those important things. But you can take examples from companies that do it super well. Like I think one company that has incredible microcopied kind of sprinkled throughout their product is Slack. So it's taking inspiration from that, the save. I love when you go into like save for later in Slack and they're like, nothing to see here. Here's an otter. And it's like a little otter emoji. Like that just makes me happy. So how can you kind of provide some joy and some sparkle without being distracting in your transactional footer, and take inspiration where you can find it because inspiration is better than, perspiration or however that quote is meant to go.
I don't even know that expression, but I kind of love it. And Slack is such a good example for that microcopy. It's such a good example too that in email you do also have to be really succinct and
Mm,
thinking about how do you say a lot without taking up a lot of space, right? Is going to be important. And I love emojis, of course. I love that they've become a currency for communication, just like language. Just sets the mood, right?
absolutely.
All right, we're going to come to the wrap up here. And before we move on to looking at what's in Slido, I think the link for that is
Absolutely.
in chat, right, Kate? Yeah. Let's talk about some key takeaways and then we'll move on to the next bit. So, in conclusion, now is a really good time, by the way, to ask questions or to leave comments or feedback, or even if you want to share like story time about your emails and localization experiences so far, we'd love to hear them. But number one, um, you've already outgrown your current workflow, your current scale. It's as of today, it's already expired. You're not there anymore. Build something that's where you're going to be a year down the road, 2 years down the road, ideally 5, if you can even think that far. But like, what's your budget going to be next year, in 2 years, in 5 years? Where are you going to be in the world? Where are your customers going to be coming from? Where are they going to live? How are they going to want to communicate with you? That's how you build your workflow. That's how you think about your strategy is project to the future. Um, I think this is my key takeaway. Uh, and I'll let Kate cover the next two because I think that they're really valuable points that you've already talked about.
Yeah, thanks. I think localizing once for emails, localization is of course a continuous process for everything else, but you only get to send that email once. So if you can just localize it that one time, have your process worked out so that were aligned on your KPIs, you had that meeting between product and marketing, that the C-suite is on board with your global strategy. You did all of those things before you went and paid to get your email localized. Yeah, test and get your stakeholders approval before you go get your strings is the message there. And then the next one, building your brand, you're thinking about every single touch point. So one way to think about this is, of course, that you're selling your lifestyle, you're not selling your product. So you're selling whatever it is that the outcome is of your product, the benefits over features always. And that you're not using any email in a way that wastes an interaction. So you're always putting value of those, um, into each of those touch points.
I love it. Thank you, Kate. Now I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is just our like placeholder for questions and answers. And I'm wondering, let's have a look and see if there are questions in here that anybody would like us to answer. Again, we love email anecdotes, thoughts. Let's hear it. Anonymous is fine. If you want to share your name, that's great too. If you share your name, we can also reply to you offline afterwards. And I'll mention that as well. Like you can get in touch with Kate and I offline at any time. Our information's available. So, Kate, let us know what's in the questions. Kate's going to be moderating the questions for us.
Yeah, for sure. We do have our first question, which is Anonymous asks, do you have any tips around email localization using dynamic content and variables in email? Really, really great question. I'm going to let Veronica answer this one.
Yeah, I think that my answer, the tips around it is just do it. Don't not do it. Don't work around it. But don't overthink it. So in Dyspatch, we make this possible. You set up data profiles one time and you can test with the localization. So my tip is the same thing I've been saying before, which is like test everything. But really this thing is just like don't not do it because it's harder. Your customers are going to expect this. And I would say just use a tool that makes it really, really easy to do so that you can do it without having to check code or test anything manually. In Dyspatch, we built data profiles so that you could do this one time and just reuse everything. So making sure, for example, like a common example is, do they have a subscription or not? Where in the country do they live? Things like that. I hope that's helpful in terms of more tips, but I would say like do a lot and then test the ROI of the email, like test the email's performance once you actually implement some of this dynamic content as well. I think that's another thing is people think, oh, I'm just going to do this, it works, but test it so that A, you can report on the ROI, on like the value of doing it, and even A/B test it down the line, and then adjust from there based on performance. So yeah, and then, oh, and think about fallbacks always. Thinking about fallbacks is like my favorite thing because for whatever reason, fallbacks are really, really obvious when you don't nail them in emails. Like typos, some people see them, some people don't, but not having the correct fallback for like, let's say you don't know the person's city and you're saying like, given this hot weather in Atlanta, you might want new sunglasses and you wanted to populate somebody's city. If you get it wrong, it's like so obvious to people. So check fallbacks would be my tip. Yeah. Happy to show more of this in another webinar if that's of interest. Maybe we do a dynamic content webinar.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great idea. It's such an important topic of the personalization of each of these emails that we're sending. Folks are not trying to get the same cookie cutter email for every single person. Okay, we have another question here. Jill asks, do you have any suggestions on updating the content in view of changes needed from both the localization side and the distribution side? Thank you. Jill, thank you for your question. Any suggestions on updating content in view of changes needed from localization side and distribution side? So yeah, I mean, really, that's where the dispatch phrase relationship comes in handy, or any other relationship between your localization tech and your email distribution tools, email design tools, whatever you're using to build those emails. So take a look at, like I was saying earlier about your requirements. If it's going to be a requirement that you need to sync your localization between one tool to the other, is there an integration there? How does that work? Can you get a demo of it? Can you compare multiple systems to see what's going to work? Anything to add there?
Yeah, I have one note, and that's it's kind of extrapolating or adding to the first thing you said, which is tools that work together really well. So whatever you're using to send, whether you're using like Iterable or whatever your ESP or your CRM is, with Phrase and Dyspatch or similar tools to us, what you see at that last step, like HubSpot or Iterable, it will be done. So choose tools that integrate together so that when you're looking at email performance and your campaigns, you're just looking at that. You're not actually doing any like testing or verification or edits down the line. Do those at the very early stage, get your localizations done, get the emails done, and then save that like last sending bit as a completely different initiative. And part of that is so that you can not make mistakes. Like if you're making changes later on the fly in, say, HubSpot, you might introduce errors that are harder to test there. But just so that you think of the experiences like hopping from one place to the other. And by the time you get to the distribution side, you're just thinking about the email's performance. So you're just looking at campaigns and open rates and, A/B testing at that point. Hopefully that answers the question, Jill. If you have follow-ups, please let us know here or even offline.
Perfect. All right. If there are any other questions, feel free to drop them in either the chat or the Slido. We'll wait here for just another sec.
Well, Kate, it's been absolutely great chatting with you this morning. It's morning here, I guess, wherever anybody is in the world. I would say that we're pretty easy to find on the internet. If you have any questions or if you'd like us to help you chat about your own current process and how to get to the next part, this is fun for us. So don't hesitate to reach out to Kate or to me or both of us and say like, look, I'm thinking about these things. Here are my challenges, or here's the hesitation I'm getting from my team to do it, or here's, the limits I have in my budget, and we'll help you come up with options. I think we love to talk about this. So if you have any questions later on, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Find us on LinkedIn, or we can connect by email, whatever works for you. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. Bye now.
Bye now.